Go live. I think we're almost there. All right, we are live. All right, good evening, everybody. This is Patrick Milliken from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we're here with another, and I should say, guitar enthusiast, but I promise not to derail Lincoln on guitar stuff too much. But we're here another of our virtual events tonight. And we're really delighted to have Lincoln with us to discuss his brand new book, Chrysalis. And with him this evening is what he refers to as his editor of, what is it, Christmas Past, Jason Kaufman, who's in the dark there. He'll explain the situation. It's very cool. And Barbara is tuning in from her home office, where it is sweltering in the heat and have a kind of a crummy internet connection, but goes with the territory here in Arizona. But I will be largely behind the scenes. You'll be happy to know. So if you have questions for Lincoln, go ahead and put them in the comments or chat field, and Barbara will bring me on screen towards the end of the hour. I'll be happy to ask any of your questions. And we are getting a massive amount of signed copies of Chrysalis, and I'm sure Barbara will discuss that with you. We should be getting them next week. So anyway, Barbara, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Patrick. It's 115, and it does mean that sometimes the internet connection here goes unstable. So if we just kind of all pause, don't panic. We're not going away. And Jason is, well, Jason, tell us where you are, because it's really a great location.
Well, I'm on vacation, and I'm on a small island in the New England area that has the most terrible Wi-Fi. So I have managed to find Wi-Fi because anything for Lincoln, you know, and for you, Barbara. So I'm actually sitting outside of the library on Block Island, which is the one reliable place. You see, the House of Books, and I'm getting a little bit of Wi-Fi through the doorway. So if I cut out or disappear, it's probably for that reason, but I'm hoping it'll stay.
I assure Jason that the idea of having a sepulchral voice kind of coming out of the dark would make this an even more interesting program than usual. And actually it kind of fits Lincoln Child's books with Jeremy Logan. And I have a couple words to say, and then I'm hoping that Lincoln and Jason will kind of run through the early history of Jeremy before we get to this book. So because there are so many hundreds of books that had to arrive at Lincoln's home, lucky Lincoln, by truck, and they have to be picked up and they have to be air freighted here. It's not going to happen that they'll get here probably until Monday. And then because that's not yet enough books, we have to send Lincoln even more books, and they still are going to have to come. So those of you who've ordered them, you're going to need to be patient for a week or two, just because of all the shipping stuff. But bravo to Lincoln, who has diligently sat home. Where have you signed all these books? You sent me photos, but I wasn't
in my
clear.
dining room. But I have to thank all you people. I mean, everybody, you know, whether you go to the library or you buy these expensive signed copies, I really appreciate it. In this case, I have to thank my wife, Lucy, who helped me bring the books in to the garage and sign them, you know, tape them back up and take them back out. In the past, I've signed thousands of books in warehouses or in publishers' offices, but this was a different experience. But, you know,
well, I think you've been really good to your fans, Lincoln, because we had a serious talk about whether he was really up for this. And he agreed. And so I really appreciate the orders, but more than that, I think I appreciate the support that you fans have shown Lincoln in this endeavor. And because this is publication day, I'm going to raise a glass to you, dear, and a little toast to both Jason and Lincoln in their journey. Oh, come on, Lincoln. That's so lame.
Sorry. Okay, here we go. This is better.
Very good. We have done we have done uninterrupted launches for Lincoln's book since 2012. And most often he actually shows up with a real cocktail. So I'm not sure why today that's not the case. Oh, well. Anyway, Jason, why don't you've edited all of Lincoln's standalone books. Right. Yeah, you have. So why don't you take us through the history of how we got to Chrysalis with Jeremy Logan?
Sure, sure. Well, it's been a rich and interesting history for me, certainly. So yeah, I mean, Lincoln, I was thinking about this. I think it's been 21 years that we've been working
Oh
together. Could
God,
that possibly be
really?
right? I think it
Uh,
is.
yeah. I think yeah, it could
Yeah,
be.
because I think it was. So, you know, well, you know, as everybody knows who knows Lincoln, the greatest thing about him is that he has this fascination with technology and science and melding that with what is sort of cutting edge and the kind of things that either technology that's happening tomorrow feeling or just writing about not only suspense, but always there's an element that you wonder whether it's supernatural or extraterrestrial or whether it's just the mystery. And a lot of times in the books, you know, one of my favorite things is talking with you, Lincoln, about you know, how much is going to be, how far you're leaning into it with any particular plot line. And so yeah, but the Jeremy Logan character, who really I mean, Jeremy has come a long way. When we think about the first two books did not have Logan. That the first one was Utopia, which was later renamed Lethal Velocity, and then the second, which was Deathmatch, which were both just such fun standalone thrillers that we had a great time on. And then it was the third book that you had done for Doubleday, which was Deep Storm. And for people who have read it, you may remember that, right? We had this small little scene. It was a cutaway scene. And where did it take place? It was at an abbey or
I think in Scotland.
in Scotland.
I think so. Yeah.
And
Only
there was
one chapter.
one chapter, just a
Yeah.
tiny cutaway for an academic guy who was sitting in this incredible lush library overlooking the ocean that was centuries old, and he uncovered a small piece of information which became relevant to the story of what had actually happened, you know, 1,000 years earlier there. And later on, we started talking about him and saying, you know, what about that guy? He didn't even have a name, but he was so interesting and fun, and he became kind of resurrected from that one scene and turned into Jeremy Logan.
And I have you to thank for that, because I only wrote that scene really to cut away from the undersea lab where most of the book was taking place. And I thought, okay, I'll go as far away as I can from this place. I'll go to the Hebrides or something like that. And you're right, he didn't have a name there, but you really liked that chapter and the environment. And so we sort of shoehorned him into the next book. And then it wasn't until the following book, I think, which was the third gate, which he really, you know, came to the fore from the very beginning.
Yeah, you're right, because the book after Deep Storm, Terminal Freeze, he was a named character and he sort of came in in a minor role.
Yeah.
And then for the third gate, which was his first time in a full protagonist role, he was flown to Egypt to the Sud, which was this demarcation line in between, you know, north and south ancient Egypt, Sudan areas, and he was investigating an ancient this excavated burial ground where you know, people thought it was inhabited by a spirit that had been unleashed because of the work they were doing. So that was sort of Logan's first main role in the third gate. But he really then went from there, because there was the Forgotten Room, which was in coastal Rhode Island, probably not too far from where I'm sitting now, though there must have been better Wi-Fi in the Forgotten Room. And you know, and then there was Full Wolf Moon in the Adirondacks, and this overhanging question of werewolves, and then that sort of leads us to Chrysalis. So I guess, but the first thing I was going to ask you is, how are you feeling with each book? You feel more familiar with Logan and sort of see the broadness of his character?
First of all, before I answer that, I want people to know that Jason is like the editor's editor. You know, I used to be an editor myself, And the way he's able to recite 8 books of mine and the plot lines and the titles is he can do a better job than I can talking about them. So thank you, Jason, for
Somebody
that.
has to do it, Link.
Um, uh, it's funny. Not only was Jeremy Logan not intended to be a serious character, but it took a while for him to develop because a lot of the books I did with Doug were very science-based. And they were trained into not quite supernatural, like Relic or, and had a scientific a explanation at the end. But I really like the characters that were created by some of the writers around the turn of the century, like Karnacki, the Ghost Finder, and a few others like that, who actually were supernatural sleuths, so that the supernatural wasn't off the table completely. For example, King Tut's curse might actually be a curse. It's not as it isn't always spores or fungi or whatever. Maybe it's a ghost, and I like that because it freed me up to have a scientific foundation and build on that, but also, leave readers in the dark as to being in the dark, you're vanishing.
I know I'm trying to make this a little brighter if I can.
Okay.
We're gonna give that a try.
But I didn't want to write horror stories per se at all, or spook stories. But I always wanted readers to know that Logan, being an enigmologist, solving riddles like the Loch Ness Monster or whatever it might be, Bigfoot, or you name it, could veer into the supernatural realm, and readers won't know. They can't be guaranteed it will be a scientific answer at the end. And on the other hand, in a book like Chrysalis, there's no, I don't think it's giving anything away to say there are no monsters save the human variety, because I wanted him to also have a chance to explore complicated, cutting edge mysteries that pose questions about what we're going through in the world today, like virtual technology and medical implants, and not necessarily vampires and mummies and things like that. And also be physically challenged and put at great risk, which is easier to do when you're dealing with humans than ghosts.
Yep. And I think that actually that's the thing that's so interesting to me about Logan is that, I've edited other series that, the character is the character. It's a very stagnant kind of character, maybe a great character, but there isn't all that much room for the character to change or to grow. And, like you and I have talked about so many times, there's almost nothing under the sun that Jeremy Logan can't get involved with. And, there are just so many options, and sometimes we have too many on the table to think about narrowing down into one book. But what's interesting about him is I think over the course of these books, he has sort of found his roots as an investigator who, it started where he was an enigmologist, and he was taking on basically the kinds of things that nobody could understand or explain. And that is still the root of who he is. But as you said, now, he gets involved in things that kind of fall in between those shaded areas of police or government or private investigators or scientists. He has this broad-based knowledge and his unique erudite perspective, much like you, Lincoln, that he always brings to the table. And so I love getting a first draft of a manuscript or an early chapter or something from you, a section, and reading just the kind of pithy, funny dialogue that Logan always brings to a situation. So that's always a lot of fun. But he really is always able to to grow into these new situations. And I think Chrysalis is maybe the best example of that, because it's very real and it presents this, kind of this technological, ethical conundrum of where the world is and where, we love technology so much. So, I mean, I shouldn't talk about that. I should ask you about this, because we had a pretty interesting evolution starting to talk about Chrysalis from one idea, which was very different, to what it ended up being. And, you were very set on having something that spoke to where we're going and how we love and use and rely on technology, maybe to a fault. So you want to sort of talk about that a bit, and then we'll go from there?
Yeah. My very first idea was about a New York City construction project digging up something they shouldn't have. And it then haunted this university. But that had a difficult birth. I didn't want it to be outright horror, as I mentioned. And so as I excuse me, I'm getting an ad here. As I mentioned in my first newsletter, I was at my daughter's graduation, and I fell into conversation with a couple of surgeons who were talking about pacemakers. And, I had no idea that the extent of how medical science has grown. I mean, I know that, they use mesh now instead of sutures, and they have plastic skin and everything else. But I had no idea that pacemakers were so much like, the phones we use. I mean, they get updated, they get the firmware patched, and they can receive messages and in some cases send messages. And I thought, of course, I, who have to look at everything and think of the worst possibility, I think, oh my God, what if my the last patch for my pacemaker had a bug in it? Either somebody hacks it, or it freezes. I mean, I'm sure that can't happen, but in my novel it can. And that was the starting point for my doing research on medical implants. And of course, I set all my books a few years in the future so that I can take what actually exists and add some chrome to it, which, I mean, like deathmatch, about computer dating, which now is, if anything, now it's passe, my book. But, when I wrote it, it was ahead of its time. And in this case, I was able to use implants and think of ways they could be used in ways that in a couple of years may be very common, but now nobody would think of it. I mean, and the funny thing is, as I was researching the book, I would find more and more and more implants that are out there, or that are being talked about, or are being, theorized. And I got to a point where I didn't need it anymore. I made up enough, or I'd taken enough and added some fictional dressing to them. But for example, like right now, they're working with tattoos that are made of biomarkers. So they change color depending on your blood glucose. So, you can look at your tattoo and say, whoa, that anchor is red, it's not yellow or whatever. I'd better, take some insulin. I mean, it's incredible. Or RFID chips implanted in your skull or in your bones, So And this just, it dovetailed with my interest in visual technology also, which, to me, the way the web has developed so quickly, and we use it now without thinking. I mean, look at this conversation we're having. When I think of all the miles I drove to go to bookstores, just 10 years ago, it's amazing. Um, uh, and I think the web has given us that, and I think that virtual technology, where there's a few more innovations, will give us that new platform for entertainment, movies, or as in the book, our book, Jason, you wrote half of it practically. It's it's like a mall basically, and stores will buy the rights to have a storefront, and then the company will send out the APIs or the code necessary for them to program, Pottery Barn or Bed Bath and Beyond or whatever it is, and they'll create a virtual store, and you can then peruse it. And if you don't like the smell of roast chestnuts, you can press a button and it'll be steak at a nearby steakhouse, and it's just, and it's going to be it's going to, when it happens, it's going to happen so fast people aren't going to realize it. And I was able to combine that with medical implants by having a huge corporation with lots of different R&D departments. One is military, one is health, one is robotics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that fit into my earlier books, where I try and have ever since Deathmatch, really, or even Utopia, I try and have a place that is hard to get to and is self-contained and is unique. In Deathmatch, it was the facility 2 miles under the sea. And in Full Wolf Moon, it was this Adirondack Lodge, hard to get to in the middle of the mountains. In this, you mentioned Third Gate, it was this floating platform out in the Sud, which is actually this huge swamp just south of Egypt, which people say is the most awful environment on earth. It's like the Meadowlands times 100, Anyway, and so I was able to create that environment, and the company was called Chrysalis, and it also fit with the idea of the way that, implants and VR, out of the best of plans and best of hopes by the people who were creating them, can also be used for bad purposes, and the chrysalis that they are creating or that's maturing may not turn to a butterfly, may turn into a death's head moth or something like that. So, I was able to get both of these interests of mine in, and since they were both cutting edge interests, I could place them a few years in the future, not so far that it seems like science fiction, but it's far enough so people, I hope, can read it and say, oh yeah, that's not so different from, that blood glucose monitor I have right now, or that pacemaker, or whatever they might have.
Yeah, and you touched on it a bit, but I think the other thing about your books that is always just so entertaining to me is where you set it, and the setting is always kind of its own character. And in this case, I've said it to you, but I really mean it. I think that Chrysalis is by far the best book you've written. The complexity, I think, outdoes some of the other books that were quite complex. But I also just thought that the world building was so visceral and kind of powerful. I mean, that's, for people who haven't read it yet, and it's only been out today, so you probably haven't read it, but it's there is this incredible corporate campus that Lincoln is always so interested in. And this is, I think you're very interested in the power of mega companies, tech companies, research companies, and Chrysalis was sort of a cross between like what you'd expect if you wandered into the headquarters of Google or Tesla or something like that. And then, of course, there's this terrible problem that's happening, and there are, several highly placed, influential officers of the company who show up dead, are found dead within the first 12 hours or so. And that's why they call in Jeremy Logan, because there's the threat of a ransom. They're not really sure what's going on. But as you get into this company, and it is this incredible group that does futuristic virtual reality, which I think was maybe your initial driving instinct here. And then you kind of got interested in the medical
Yes.
devices.
Yeah.
And it just blossoms into this really interesting world. It's like watching Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory or something on an adult level. And
well, Jason, I have to say that what it really made me think of was Meta, because there's been so much Facebook turning into Meta. I've actually sold this book on the idea that Mark Zuckerberg should have hired Lincoln for Meta as his operations officer, because it's so like that. And I mean, my heart was won by the Egyptian setting, because I've actually been there. And it is incredibly creepy and so forth. But I do think that this one, I think most people who are paying any attention to the news can't imagine it, because it's going on. I mean, not only are there the campi so I mean, when I was an undergraduate at Stanford, none of that existed. We had my graduation party in 1962 at Stanford was hosted by David Packard Jr. And we all got to this mega mansion, and all of us said, "What's this? Who's Packard? Why is there all this?" I mean, none of us knew that Hewlett Packard, was rising up, and that the whole peninsula would turn into a series of tech campuses. But now, with all the going-ons with Facebook and Sheryl Sandberg leaving and not leading in and the whole bit, and they're talking about Meta, I think that Lincoln really hit that fiction linked to real events.
Thanks. It's funny, when Meta was first announced, I don't know if it was 9 months ago, 12 months ago, I said, they're going to think that that's where I got the idea. But we've been working on VR for what, 4 years now, Jason, at least.
Yep.
And to be honest, I don't know what Meta is. I know what Facebook is, but I don't see the vision there. But I'm happy to be, to consult with them should they need anybody to do some work on the side.
It's their bid for virtual reality, Lincoln. So it's actually right in sync with what you've written, because there goes my internet. Sorry.
Yeah, and the virtual reality.
Yep. It's their vision of, a virtual reality. So I don't think anybody would think that you took the idea for happening, alongside what you're doing, but it's not as well realized as what you did. Yours is way more developed.
Jason, do you have a sense of what Meta is trying to do? I'm just curious how it compares to what Chrysalis is trying to do.
Quite honestly, no. I just, other than what I've read here and there about it, but I have a Facebook page that I visit about every 6 months, so I'm probably not the ideal candidate. But the virtual reality component was what was really fun about this, and we had a lot of conversations early on, and just sort of thinking about what the plot was going to be for Chrysalis, where we talked about. Imagine, you could have you would have been amazed, let's say a year before the iPhone came out, that everybody suddenly a year later was going to be glued to a phone, right? And it just didn't really exist at that moment, but it happened so quickly. So Link, you were talking a lot about virtual reality, and I think it was very smart, just thinking that as soon as the delivery mechanism is there it's going to just be like a steamroller, because you'll be able to, whether it's goggles or glasses, and in this case in Chrysalis, it's this very small little device that sort of perches over your ear, and but it's taps into you, and you really seeing this and hearing things and smelling things. It will potentially take over everything, which was fascinating. You can travel in an afternoon to Scotland and do your thing. You can, we talked about, visiting St. Andrew's golf course and being fitted for a set of clubs in the pro shop that are perfect. And then, 4 days later, they arrive at your doorstep. It's a really intriguing option. Of course, in your world, what you do is you take that idea and then build a just tremendous, riveting thriller into it with a great storyline and so many twists and turns and great characters. And, that seems to always be the genesis of the ideas when you're getting it off the ground.
Well, thanks. Well, I try to put real science into my books, but not to the point where people's eyes glaze over, just enough to keep it interesting and keep it credible, but you're right. I mean, look at the web. That was just initially just a bunch of hyperlinks, and then they put graphics on top of that. And after there were graphics, it just took off. And I think that VR, when it actually becomes a real thing, is going to be a platform, just like the web is, for people to buy, to browse, to scroll. There's just, I just think of 1 or 2 more steps need to be made in terms of, I think these devices are being tested now. I don't know that for a fact, but I know that there are certain devices, like that. There's one device that helps somebody who's colorblind hear colors, and like the FDA is very slow, or whoever it is, to approve it. So I think there are a lot of perhaps I'm wrong, but I think there are a lot of products in development that are going to be directly simulating our cortex, whether it's the senses, visual, oral, whatever. And once that kind of thing becomes accepted, just like the average person, you couldn't have gotten them to sit in front of a computer, for $1,000 20 years ago, and now you can't get them out of their hands. I think that once we get over that hump, it'll take off, and no one's going to leave their house.
I think you're right, and I think that reading Chrysalis, when I really think back now on the whole finished product and the finished book, there really are so many wonderful scenes that give you a very realistic taste of what it might be. Maybe it's in 24 months from now or something, and like with a Steve Jobs type character who is blazing the trail, and what the experience can be, and just in day-to-day life. And then, of course, I do have to say, because you wouldn't say it yourself, Link, but there is a climax in this novel which is so fantastic. I think the last 100 pages, you cannot stop reading it. It is so much fun, and it all, you kind of need the first couple 100 pages to build that world and then to put you there. So not to give anything away, but it is a real treat, I think, to read.
Thank you. I have a lot of fun building these worlds, these fiction worlds that are almost there in a year or two, and then making terrible things happen in them, so that people have to read, the next chapter. I mean, I work very hard on making the books visual, and writing as I've written some screenplays, and that taught me a lot about pacing and structure. And I love getting emails saying, "Damn you, you kept me up until 5 a.m. because I couldn't stop reading, and now I'm at work and I'm tired and grumpy." Man, that's my job.
You're not grumpy. I've been writing up, every July I do a Summer of Spies roundup. And I was thinking when I was reading Chrysalis that it's not that different in a way from reading a CIA thriller, where you're looking for the mole. I mean, because there has to be one for what's going on, so who can you trust? is a big part of it. And then, like every great thriller, you need a chase scene. I mean, you really need, the momentum of a chase. So, I thought you hit all the right notes here. But what I wanted to ask Jason, in his role as an editor, because I've been one and a bookseller too, is, there's a magic moment, Jason, don't you think, when you recognize that there's an iconic character taking life in front of you. And, I remember when Dan Brown sent me the manuscript of Angels and Demons, I had read his earlier books, which frankly I thought were pedestrian. And then, hope he's not listening. And then I got Angels and Demons, and I thought, okay, a symbologist. You'll be happy to know I wasn't successful, since eventually I could not convince Simon and Schuster that they had this character. I mean, I
remember that. I do remember that because
I did my best. And then I was thinking, when Greg Hurwitz came up with The Nowhere Man, it's a really great thriller character. And I will tell you, there's a brand new one. I did his launch the other night. And it's an author who's reinvented himself under a new name, which I can't reveal. And he's created a character called Desmond Limerick. And I'm telling you that Des is like, another iconic character. And of course, we all remember Reacher, because I remember Lee coming to the store and doing Killing Floor. And I remember Vince Flynn knocking at the back door of the bookstore with his self-published book. He brought one in from the trunk of his car, and he said, you're going to take a chance on this guy. He said, I'm working hard. And those moments don't come along that often, do they?
No, they're very special, and I think that's what's so fun about working with Lincoln, is that watching Jeremy Logan go from literally a character who was in only one scene and didn't have a name because he wasn't really integral to that story, but he just kind of resonated, I think, with both of us, and became someone to build on, which is fun. So now I feel like I know Logan much better now than at the beginning, and it's been this great growth project. And like I said, the thing about Logan is just that he's not really like other characters. He's not, sort of a wounded ex-cop who's now back in the game. He's not a spy. He's not, he's just different and interesting. And he doesn't hide from the fact that he is a sleuth, and he believes in supernatural things, or at least is very open to it. Sometimes it ends up being that way, and sometimes it's not. But his toolkit is much wider than most protagonists, I think, that I've worked with, and maybe that's the right way to describe it.
Well, but what's really been interesting for you is that he didn't come to you fully fleshed out, as is normally the case. He's grown right in front of you from a small seed in a book up to this character, and that's a really unusual journey.
We had to tease him out.
Yeah. Exactly. And all Lincoln needed was, for someone to say, hey, remember that guy from Deep Storm, what about him? And then I remember Link went off, and maybe a week later called me and suddenly had all these ideas for who Jeremy Logan could be. And it's just continued to broaden since then. And,
in my book with Doug Preston, like I mentioned, we wanted to shy away. He wants to shy away from the supernatural, but this gives me. When I was at St. Martin's, I edited a lot of books of ghost stories, and this just gives me a chance to flex that a bit more. Because that's really I guess it's been resurrected in certain streaming shows now, but for years, the supernatural sleuth, the ghost breaker, that kind of character, Dick Tracy, but with ghosts, was ignored. It was just like consigned to the pulps. But I think it's a fascinating way to bring in science and thrills at the same time. And also it gives me a chance to grow Logan as a character. He isn't the kind of guy, I hope, who would stay still from book to book. He learns more. He has problems he hasn't seen before. He has weaknesses, and that that's important to me. Seeing him grow as a person, and hopefully readers will also respond to that too, seeing him develop. Because I know writing a character like our character Pendergast, I know that it's so important to see a character grow and his world grow. And I'm having a lot of fun in my little sandbox doing that with Jeremy too. And I feel that he really has a lot of potential. And I'm trying to push him, come on, Jeremy, expand your horizons a bit.
That's good to actually, yes, because Lincoln and I have a call scheduled in the next few days to start blocking out the new one.
Yeah, well, that's really right. Exciting. And you know what, Lincoln, I'm always being asked, what is going to be the next big thing? I mean, it's a constant question. And I said about 1.5 years or 2 years ago that the next big thing would be the New Gothic. And guess what? The New Gothic has absolutely blossomed in front of us. The Hacienda, Jason, brilliant book. I mean, I loved Isabel Cañas. I didn't even know there was a subgenre called a colonial Gothic. I mean, now we're doing that. But Lincoln, again, you've been sort of on the cutting edge of that because, the supernatural, there's a whole new interest in it. I don't know how much the pandemic has encouraged that or whether it's just the constant role of publishing, because it's like every generation, Jason, you must have noticed, every generation, something that went down comes back up. I mean, right now we're having a renaissance of the locked room mystery. I mean, I'm telling you, in the newsletter I'm just writing for July, there are like 7 locked room mysteries. When I wrote one in January, there were 0. So it's like, it's like a cluster that suddenly starts developing. It's fascinating. But Lincoln has stayed ahead of trend.
Yeah, I think you're right. I do think you're right. And I don't believe that it's by any larger plan or intention. I mean, I don't think that publishers and editors really talk to each other about, making a plan for that, but it just sort of happened organically.
Yeah, I think it's a zeitgeist kind of a thing. And of course, it's also a sticky kind of a thing, because if you get one book that does well like that, then other people start, sticking books to it. I mean, I've often thought if I ever really wanted to go back and finish a PhD, what I would write about would be that genre role, because I think it turns every generation. It's about a 20-year role. And I mean, when I opened the Poison Pen in 1989, the historical mystery was on the rise. Historical fiction had been dead. And everyone who wrote historical fiction suddenly started writing an historical mystery. And it was because of The Name of the Rose and Ellis Peters and, her first book. And then, like everything else, it died. And then we had the woman sleuth thing. And, I had strong men weep on my shoulder at the end of the 1990s and say they couldn't get published because it was only women writing PIs with cop boyfriends that anybody wanted to publish. And, and then after, the Da Vinci Code, all we had were Da Vinci clones. I mean, forever it went on, maybe 6 years of religious conspiracy thrillers. And then it moves on, and I agree. I think there's a sort of maybe an internal engine that sort of drives it all. But I don't think it's a cabal of publishers by any means.
I'm interested to hear you say that locked door mysteries are big right now, because there's one John Dixon Carr, he's sort of like the father of the genre. There's one mystery he wrote where his hero lays out 30 different possible locked room solutions. So I'm surprised there are any more out there. I'd be pulling my hair out trying to think of one.
Well, some of it is that Agatha Christie's having a moment, and people confuse Agatha Christie and Then There Were None or A Country House Murder with a locked room mystery. But the truth is, And Then There Were None is not a locked room mystery. It's totally different. So a locked room mystery is an impossible crime. And, and the whole thrust of it is not who did it or why it got done, but how it got done, which makes it different.
Like Murders in the Rue
people are discovering it. One of the great things about the pandemic is that we didn't even have a classics section. And now a huge swath of the bookstore is devoted to classics. And it's astonishing and really heartening, don't you think, Jason and Lincoln, to see people constantly checking out. I mean, all across the board, all kinds of classics. Random House and Putnam, both those two imprints have huge numbers of classics. St. Martin's has a wonderful, and Otto is doing a really great job with his American mystery classics. And we did a wonderful job with the Library of Congress and the British Library Classics. So, you know, it's great. And then people are discovering these old forms and appreciating them. So, you know, somebody that read, you know, the Castle of Otranto or, you know, the Fall of the House of Usher or something will like your campus more than if they've never read anything like that. So
Right, because Murders in the Rue Morgue was, in some ways, I think the first locked door mystery.
oh yeah, right,
both
exactly. And the Purloined Letter did its everything. Let's call Patrick up because I bet the audience has lots of questions and we shouldn't discourage them from those.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, I do have some questions here from the audience. Actually, here's one that Barbara can speak with. Christine would like to know, does anyone know how long it will take to get the pre-ordered book?
It's going to depend on Mitchell Air. They're picking up the first batch from Lincoln tomorrow. In theory, it's 3 days, which means they won't get here till Monday, and then we have to turn them around and ship them out. For people who've ordered more recently, we have to send more books to Lincoln. And so that's going to eat up maybe 10 days or something. It's a tribute to Lincoln's enormous popularity and his willingness to sacrifice himself and his signing hand that we're able to do this. So
it's the least I can do. I'm just sorry that I'm not there in person. We can get them to people faster, but that's
someday I'm going to arrive at your house. I'm going to put a bag over your head. I'm going to drug you and I'm going to throw you in the back of the car and I'm going to drive you to Phoenix. But so roughly 2 weeks would be my answer for later orders. We process orders in the order that they arrived, to be fair. So we start with the first ones in and go from there. So if you ordered early, you'll get your book sooner. And if you're ordering later, it will just take a while. And there's no way that we can speed it up. I'm really sorry, but it's the best anybody can do here. Next question.
The good news is I survived to sign them all. So at least
well, please be careful in the next few days. Yeah. Don't damage your hand.
They're there. They're signed and ready.
Let's see here. Okay. Actually, I have a question from our new friend Stefania from Italy, who tunes in quite a bit. She has a question for Jason, which is, what is the worst mistake an editor can make?
That's a pretty interesting question. It might be answered differently by every editor, but I would say for me, it's stepping too hard on what your author is trying to do, finding the balance between your own opinions and what you think the author's opinion is. So it's especially with the new author you haven't worked with much before, then you don't want to speak too strongly or have a comment about something and then have that writer decide, well, I better really reverse this, or I better do it the way that my editor is saying. Because a lot of times the best thing that can happen is you just sort of prompting somebody to think about a piece that could be changed or isn't quite working, and then it's the writer who you kind of want to leave to have the right idea of how to fix it.
I think the worst mistake personally is to decline Gone with the Wind.
A question for Lincoln, which is, are there any topics that you consider taboo to write about?
I think I have his name right. Andrew Vax.
Yeah, Vax, it was.
Vax, yeah. Mm-hmm. He writes about killers of children, I think. And that's something that I would shy away from, anything, although there are some underage people who've died in some of our early books. I guess it's hard for me to know. I guess anything that would make me shudder with squeamishness, I would stay away from, in terms of ethics or morals, but in terms of things, the everyday things, like elevators that are supposed to work, or subways, or they're fair game. for me.
Here's a question about your partnership with Doug. Um, how do you create a partnership with another writer? Is it important that you have the same common vision of things, or does it help that you have opposite visions sometimes? Is there creative tension?
I think that, my belief is that every single partnership is very different from every other one. I think that, for example, Lennon and McCartney, the differences really helped them a lot. Of course, they're, I'm not comparing us to Lennon and McCartney, but there are other cases where two writers share a vision of the kind of thriller that has to be written, but it's very difficult to sit down and say, hey, let's write books together. I don't think that's what happens usually. I think what happens is somebody starts helping somebody else, or in my case, I was the editor of an author and we started working together, especially with fiction. I don't know if the questioner is asking about nonfiction or fiction, but when we started writing together, the idea of two people writing a novel together was like anathema. We were almost given a pseudonym, so people would buy the book.
Let's see here. Well, somebody on YouTube, Tatty Sai, which is a great name, says, although virtual environments are the new thing, quote, the metaverse, I still will not read a book on Kindle. LOL. I have to hold a book, a hardcover book. Bless you, Tatty. We agree entirely. Let's see. Jessica Pomerantz makes the point that your new book is the #1 techno thriller on Amazon today. That's
really?
Awesome. Congratulations. Yeah.
Who said that? Who?
Somebody who's watching. I'll have to look that up.
Okay. Well, thank you for letting me know that.
Heads up.
And letting us all know that.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Okay. Marie just said, just now bought this novel by Lincoln along with Diablo Mesa. I've read most, including the ones co-authored with Douglas Preston. Keep up the excellent work. You just have a lot of fans here that are just saying how much they love your stuff.
Well, Patrick, let me insert a comment since you just made that thing that Doug and Lincoln have forged a third voice. They are writing as one, so to speak, sort of a mind meld. However, they have worked it out, and every writing partnership has a different way of doing it. But Lincoln's books are Lincoln's voice. They're not the same voice as Preston and Child. Would you agree with that, Jason?
Yeah, I do actually. I think that's a great way to put it, and I think that it's Lincoln and Doug have they really have such a seamless way of working together, and I think that they're so used to each other in the way that they construct a story. And I think for Lincoln, it's a different. You have to correct me if I'm wrong, Link, but I think for you it's like a clean sheet, and you sort of do everything in your own voice and your own instinct. And I think it's probably one of those things where you love doing both.
Well, it has its ups and downs. For example, yesterday I wrote the last chapter of the next Pendergast book. And today I heard Doug tell me it sucks. You got to start from square one on this chapter. And he was right in most ways. On this one point, he was right. So, but I agree. There are 3 different voices. And I'm always curious if readers can tell who wrote what chapter, because as our books have gone on, we've diverged more in that our chapters are written separately, and then the other one does a little bit of polishing. When before they were a lot more blended, and so I'm always curious to know if people can say, "Oh, Link, I can see you wrote that one," or not. But
this isn't totally about you, because let's say that Doug, who writes books on his own, Doug has his own voice too. you know,
Right.
The Lost City of the Monkey God. I mean, it's a completely different narrative voice, and it's also nonfiction, so it would necessarily be. But we've done any number of events with Doug. In fact, we did his first ever event, which was for Cities of Gold, which is remains one of my favorite travel books of all time. And you know, The Monster of Florence. He's, you know, Talking to the Ground. I actually persuaded him, because Simon, I'm going to pick on Simon and Schuster again here. They don't ever like to let anything lapse that they own, and it was going nowhere. So I said to Doug, let's make them reprint it, and we'll show them how many we can sell. So they did reprint it, and they reprinted like 900 copies, but we ordered 2,200. And so, you know, now it's still in print again. So that's a completely different voice that he has. And he's written science fiction, you know, that's another completely different voice. I think it's wonderful that you guys managed to come up with. I mean, Jason, do you know other authors who are able to do that, write together and then write distinctly separately like that?
Not really. Certainly not at the level that Lincoln and Doug have managed to do, which I think is remarkable. You know, these are creative guys, and not to mention just the volume of their output. You know, there's a lot going on there. I would hate to see your hard drive, Lincoln.
Yeah, well, we have no choice in terms of the output. You know, we have these slave drivers like my editor, but we love it. You know, it's the day it becomes a job is the day we stop doing it. And I loved writing from before I could even, I knew how to form letters. My dad would bring home exam books from college where he was a professor, and I just take the blue books and I just fill in scribbles. I was so eager to write. And I lost the interest while I was in publishing, but I gained it back afterwards, and it's been a fun ride ever since. And
But Lincoln, we should never undervalue your original role as an editor, because basically you and Doug are self-editing, you know, as you write. But when you're writing with Jason is your editor. So you have the same sort of dialogue going on. It's you and Jason as opposed to like you and Doug. And, you know, I don't know to what degree you and Doug are edited by Wes, but, you know, whatever's going on there. And then Doug has an editor, but, you know, you were the first in this equation to be an editor. And I think that your skills as an editor have contributed hugely to the way this whole thing has developed.
thank you.
Jason, would you agree with that?
I do. 100%, because it's so easy to work with Lincoln, and we spend a lot of time just on the phone talking and throwing ideas around, which is always a lot of fun. But it's easy to do the work because he knows where it's coming from. And so, you know, and Lincoln is the first one to be willing to, you know, rip something apart and think about redoing it. And so it always just leads to a better finished manuscript.
I have to give Jason some real props here, because he really helped with this book. I mean, you know, he mentioned this, it was about VR up front. And so I spent so much time originally thinking about the nuts and bolts of the VR and how cool it would be. He reminded me I had to get plenty of murders up front, you know, to jumpstart the story. And so, you know, I took it all apart and wove back together. And so he really earned his acknowledgments on this one.
So you were lost in the tech weeds, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it. Patrick, is there anything else before we wind up?
Yeah, you know, Barbara, you mentioned some of Doug's nonfiction work. Lincoln, do you have any aspirations to ever write a nonfiction book? Or
No, I don't. Just the idea of getting all the research right, you know, and Doug writes occasional articles with the New Yorker, and you know, his first book was edited by me, and that was nonfiction. It was based on articles he'd written for the American Museum. But you know, in Doug's case, at least with like Monkey God, for example, he's such a raconteur, and he's also incredibly brave. and to go down to where he went to, Honduras and get whatever that ailment was that he got, leishmaniasis, and and being dropped from the jungle by helicopter. You'd never get me to do that kind of stuff, but it's perfect for him because then he's such a storyteller.
I can't even get you out of Florida, let alone.
Oh, I was in New York last month. He got me out of Florida, but
Funny.
you
I'll
know,
be happy to announce, although Doug will kill me, that actually there is a collection of his short nonfiction pieces currently being prepared for publication. And it looks really interesting and has a rather alarming title, which we've consulted on, and we'll see whether that works or not. But anyway, what's wonderful is that both of you keep up this whole energy level and this level of publishing. It's not like one of you is in a slump, while the other one is. I find it just astonishing. I really do. And Lincoln, this is 10 years that we've been doing this together. And I can't tell you, you and Doug and I have done it together for a lot longer, but it's just been an absolute treat.
And the first time I showed up in a smoking jacket and a martini in my hand, I remember.
I will never forget, Jason, you probably don't know this, but Doug was here doing something for one of his own books. And he said to me, do you think, this is in 2011, because it took a while. And he said to me, do you think there's a way that Lincoln and I could ever do an event together because he doesn't travel? And I was standing in the Arizona Biltmore after the Arizona Women's Lunch with the jumbo TV screens on and so forth. Now, I know nothing about technology, okay? Zero. But I said, because I was pretty sure I could make it work, I think I said that we could bring Lincoln in and we could put him up on the big screen, and then we could, this is before Zoom, I can't even remember how we did it. And then we could broadcast it back out, and then everybody could share in that. And I can't even remember how much it cost to do all that. Grand Central sucked it up and paid for it. But that was your first #1, remember? We got you to #1 on the Times list with that book. And so we've been doing it ever since, but Zoom has made it unbelievably easier than however that originally
we did it by
Skype.
Skype for a while.
Skype,
Yeah, Skype. Remember we had the big screen that we put him up
Was
on?
it Skype? Yeah, I guess you're right.
Yeah.
I said we could Skype him in and put him on the big screen for the live audience. And then we could, somehow or other, was it?
I don't know.
Live stream it back out. That was it, right?
We made it work.
We
Yeah.
did. We did.
Yeah.
And the least qualified person in the entire equation was the one who had the vision to say, okay, we can do this. But you've been such a champ all these years, putting yourself through signing books at home and doing all these things. I can't tell you how much we appreciate it.
well, thank you, Barbara, and thank you for hosting this. And Patrick, thanks for putting it together, and Jason, thanks for coming out on your vacation. Is it cold up there? You're wearing a sweater or something?
No, it's a short sleeve.
Oh, okay.
And the best part is, Jason, that your phone did not run out of power, so that we've actually got your face through this whole thing. It's been wonderful. So what a fun night, guys. Thank you very much. I am going to take Kathy Rice out to dinner, who is stranded nearby at a hotel. And
I do have a few people, Barbara, I do have a few people asking, of course, about the upcoming Pendergast. So would you mind just saying a few words about that?
Sure. It's the Cabinet of Dr. Lang, and you can order it on the Poison Pen website. It's already there. We already have several hundred orders. But Lincoln, what do you want to say about it?
If I can rewrite the last chapter in a way that Doug is happy with, the book will be done. And I really feel that, I don't want to shift the subject matter from my own spotlight, but I think that the ending of this book is going to just blow people away and make them very angry too. Not because of what happened, but what doesn't happen. But while I have everybody's attention, I just wanted to thank all of my readers and our readers out there. I know that hardcover books are really expensive, and that, and paperbacks and buying Kindle or waiting in line to reserve books at the library, it all takes time. And I really appreciate all the enthusiasm and, you know, the good advice I get and the corrections and even the bad reviews people give me, you know, it helps. I mean, I usually anyway. So thank you for your enthusiasm, and it's really the readers who make this possible.
They do. And let me also say that we don't have any control over the price of the book, but to do this kind of a project is incredibly expensive. Just to get the books from Lincoln to the bookstore is going to cost us $1,600 in freight. And that's why we can't discount the books like you can in a major corporation. We just can't do that without losing our shirts. So we're sorry too that the books are so expensive. I would give a great deal if the price dropped about $10 a book, but we're all facing rising costs and supply, chain issues, cost of printing, cost of paper, cost of binding, everything has gone up. So I don't see any way that we're going to be able to lower prices anytime soon, but there are a lot of costs in a project like this that you don't see as a consumer. So we appreciate your willingness to support that. Anyway, thank you. It's been absolutely wonderful. Let's do this again. I like this idea. And maybe, Jason, you could be back in New York so you don't have to do this on your phone.
By flashlight, right?
I love the idea that you're hiding outside the Block Island Library, the only hotspot on Block Island.
Library. I don't think anyone sees me here. So
I think it's great. It's amazing you haven't been arrested.
Yeah, the cops ain't coming. Who's
right. I think a great end to
here?
this is that the cops at Block Island are going to arrive and spotlight Jason and haul him off. So we don't want that to happen. So thanks, guys, very much. Good night. Thank you all who joined us this evening. It was really wonderful to see you all. Good night.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Barbara.